Good morning, everyone. Today is Thursday, October 30th, 2025. This is Craig Studnicky. We are here today to present our Q3 Miami report on behalf of ISG World and RelatedISG. As you know, we decided to start producing this 4 times a year at the end of every business quarter during 2020 because things were changing so much during 2020. Well, 2025 is no different than 2020. You're going to see today that things have changed significantly, in my opinion, since the end of June, which is the end of Q2. And it starts actually with the headlines. Yeah, the media always takes a shot at South Florida, particularly the New York media when it comes to Miami. But we've noticed a change of direction with the media. You will see as we present Q3 that stars are starting to realign for Miami, with Miami being Fort Lauderdale, Miami being Palm Beach. A combination of resale activity, developer sales activity, change in interest rates, and actually a change in some of the older condominiums that were subject to milestone laws have all lined up to create different headlines. Let's start with the Miami Herald. Back in August, in the middle of Q3, they write an article that says the Florida housing market sees a major shift with a jump in pending sales. Oh, this is different than Q2, isn't it? Even different from Q1, when they were talking about Miami being the epicenter of so much inventory to sell, and even suggesting that prices might be going down. No. Second article from the Miami Herald in September. South Florida sees a huge spike in September sales due to lower interest rates. That was September. Oh, they're a lot lower now. And then in South Florida Business Journal, this was just a week ago, but since today is October 30th, we thought we'd sneak this in. I love this headline. Condo sales are up. What the numbers about the South Florida housing market are saying. That's okay. We're going to explain all of that in our presentation this morning. We're going to start with MLS. These are condominium sales that were recorded this year, not just sales, but also listings. Look at this slide. This shows that certainly MLS listings were up in Q2 by comparison to Q1, 25,000. In the past, I have said that normally around 22,000 condominiums are MLS, the multiple listing service. The resale market, resale condominium inventory in Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties combined. By the time we got to the end of June, Q2, it was up to 25,000. It's a little more than the 22,000, but that's okay. That number by itself suggested that we shifted from a seller's market to a buyer's market until you age the condominiums. That's what the media did not do. That's what we at ISG did do. And who knows, maybe the media finally caught up to it. Because when you bifurcate, when you separate the older condos, 30, 40, 50 years of age and older, with the younger condos, oh, it's a very different story. At the end of Q2, over close to 90% of all resale inventory in MLS was over 30 years of age, all subject to the milestone laws imposed upon us as a result of what happened 4 years ago in Surfside at Champlain Towers, which basically means all of the older condos had to pretty much come up to code, up to current building code. And the problem is, in a nutshell, most condominium associations do not have the cash to bring the buildings up to code. And therefore, they issue these things called special assessments. And that's in part what caused inventory to swell in MLS, 30, 40, 50-year-old condos, and prices to start to dip. That's all true. But when you look at the other side of the coin, the younger condos that are less than 30 years old, there was only a little over 3,000 of them. Tells a very different story. One is absolutely a buyer's market, the condos over 30 years old. And one is absolutely a seller's market, the condos that are less. Well, we've had a little change, I think a very healthy change during Q3. The amount of total inventory that's in MLS dropped from 25,000 to 24,000. That by itself is not very significant, although clearly we have less inventory for sale. What's more significant is the difference between the younger and the older. Today, there are 6,000 condos for sale less than 30 years old. Remember, that number should be double, should be closer to 12. It's okay. I'll take the 6,000 because 3 months ago, I had only 3,000 to sell. I'll take the 6,000, so will you. But what's very interesting are the condos that are north of 30 years of age, 30, 40, 50 years old. They dropped. You're down to 17,000 not 21,000. And number two, it's only 75%, 74% to be specific, of total inventory. Well, what does this mean? It means some of this inventory is selling. You see, not all of the condos that were 30, 40, 50 years old were in bad shape. Some were beautifully maintained, beautifully maintained. Some actually have proper cash in the reserve account as imposed upon us by the state of Florida pursuant to these milestone laws. Those are the kind, and I can assure you almost all of the ones that have been selling are on the water, ocean, bay, intracoastal. Nicely maintained, cash reserves, good locations, they're selling. You wanna know why? Because they're bargains. Because all got brushed with the same brush. If you're over 30, 40, 50 years of age, your price is either plateaued or even dipped a little bit. They're great values. Lots of buyers are seeing the opportunity. Lots of you realtors are taking them to those properties. Well, the numbers pretty much speak for themselves. It's very nice to see. There are still some of these older condos that have issues, but some of the condos that are over 30, 40, 50 years old are great buys. I imagine by the time we produce Q4, this number will change for the better even more. Perhaps the worst news of the 30, 40, 50-year-old condos, perhaps, is behind us. George Perez, chairman of Related Group, our partner at RelatedISG. Several months ago, he and his sons, John Paul Perez and Nick Perez, were interviewed by CNBC talking about the state of the market in South Florida. It was right during Q2. George came out with this quote, and I've said this in Q2, but I think it's worth repeating because it helps me set up the rest of the presentation of the data that we're presenting today on Q3. What he said was that Florida, for as long as I've been in business, for 50 years, has been a roller coaster. And what I always tell the investor and the buyer is this: when the roller coaster goes down, the next up has never been higher. Again, what George is suggesting here is when the roller coaster swings back up, in other words, when the market starts to improve again, you can expect valuations of condominiums and single-family homes to be at a higher level than the previous high from the previous cycle. Well, I went ahead and tried to prove where we are in the cycle. George is right about what happens when the roller coaster goes up. Is the roller coaster swinging, back up? Yeah, the data says so. When you look at total transactions of January through September of this year, and let's just compare from January through September of last year. This year, total transactions are 19,000 condos. Last year, they were 17,400. And you could see we're offering a graph here that shows the amount of closings that took place in Q1 of this year compared to Q2 of this year compared to Q3. 5,900, 6,300, 6,700. Looks like the roller coaster is swinging back up. That combined with the fact that you've got more transactions this year than you did last year. Why that is important to me and should be important to you is because we were dealing with much higher mortgage rates in January through September of this year than we were last year, much higher. And still, combination of factors, mostly the demand curve, is showing that the roller coaster this year, 2025, is in fact swinging back up. Days on the market, I find this to be incredibly useful. Back in Q3 of 2023, 2 years ago, the average days on the market were around 9 months. Things were a little bit slow. A year ago, by the end of Q3 of last year, 240 days, that's 8 months. 8 months has been shrunk in half. By Q3 of this year, 4 months. Doesn't matter what the condo is, doesn't matter what the price point is, doesn't matter how old it is. It went from 8 months a year ago to 4 months this year. So let's go back to the George Perez quote. When the roller coaster swings back up, what we're seeing is more velocity. You're seeing shorter days on the market. It very much looks like, and seems to me, the roller coaster is definitely swinging back up. Now here's where we spike the football. Mortgage rates. Here's a quick graph to show you where the average 30-year fixed rate loan by Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac Mortgage Bankers Association, what they published as of January all the way through the end of September. Yeah, the big difference even between Q2, when it was at 6.8 and now it's 6.18, that's a significant drop in interest rates. I will stick my chin out and tell you that Santa Claus is coming to town. Yeah, by the end of December, you can probably expect a 30-year fixed rate loan to be below 6%. And what does that mean? Well, that means thousands of people enter the marketplace. Probably most of them are currently renting. But when rates get that low, they don't want to wait for rates to get lower because the house they want to buy or the condominium with that beautiful water view may go to some other family. When mortgage rates drop, more people enter the marketplace every single time. So going back to Mr. Perez's quote, when the roller coaster swings back up, we're definitely seeing more velocity this year than we did last year. We're seeing the average days on the market drop in half. What was 8 months a year ago is now 4 months. And now the gas in the tank, the fuel behind my optimism, and I think it really should be yours as well, is what's happening in the credit markets. Interest rates are going down. And if President Trump has his way, and goodness, it seems like he gets his way, I think you can remain confident that mortgage rates will definitely be in the 5s next year, hopefully by the end of this year. Let's go to new construction. By the end of Q2, we said there were 137 brand new developments that are being developed between Miami, Miami Beach, and Fort Lauderdale. Fort Lauderdale, which would include up to Pompano, not Palm Beach County at this point. 137. Now it's up to 142. 142 in total. It's around 30,000 units, a combination of short-term rental projects, condo hotels, as well as what I call traditional condos, condos with rental restrictions, the kind of condos that people live in when they're here year-round or when they're here for long periods of time in a second home. So yes, there are close to 30,000 now in development. Half of that inventory are short-term rentals. The other half are what we call traditional condos. Well, since people don't live year-round in a short-term rental, I'm going to keep the body of the rest of the presentation dedicated to the traditional condos, the other 15,000. So let me review. There's a total of 142 buildings, 30,000 units. Half of those are short-term rentals. Half of those are traditional condos. Of the traditional condos, the 15,000 or so that are in development, only half are under construction. This next slide is what I call my Esther Jimenez slide. She's a colleague of mine that works for us down at Shoma Bay in North Bay Village. And this, I know it seems like I repeat this in every single Miami report, but I think it's worth repeating. In the 2000s, from 2000 through 2007, because nothing got started in 2008, there were 59,000 condos that were developed in Miami, Miami Beach, and Fort Lauderdale. Yes, that's too many. 275 buildings. That's a lot of inventory. That's a lot of buildings. In the next cycle, which began in 2011 and 2012, we built 19,400 units in 123 buildings. I have made reference to my colleague, my partner in the Miami report. Her name is Athena Rosano. She and I looked at that number a lot. That's the number that we need to build, we being the real estate development community in South Florida, every 10 years, just to satisfy the population growth of South Florida, 19,000. That doesn't include second home sales. That does not include investor sales. That only accommodates the strong population gains that South Florida has been enjoying, and in fact, enjoying more and more even this year, which I'll get to in a second. But we're way short of that. There are about 15,000 condos in development in this cycle, this decade, which began in 2021. Unfortunately, there's only 75, about half of those, 7,600, that are under construction. For those of you that think that the inventory shortage is going to be solved by pre-construction, you're a little over-optimistic on that, because what we really need is closer to 20,000. You've only got 15,000 in development, but of that, you only have 7,600 that are under construction. When I moved here in 1991, a 30-story condominium was considered a high-rise. Well, we're not building 30-story condos anymore. They're 50 stories, they're 60, 70, 80. Heck, the Waldorf Astoria in downtown Miami is 100 stories. Now, we've moved from, I guess, what you could call high-rise to super tall. They take time to build. I often make reference to Aston Martin, beautiful 70-story condominium in downtown Miami, 70 stories. Took over 6 years to build. If you use that as your guide, which we did, we examined the 7,600 condos that are currently under construction. What's happening with the others? They're pretty much waiting for the interest rates to drop a little more, so their borrowing costs are a little more digestible, they being the real estate developers that are developing those projects. But of the 7,600 that are under construction, we broke it out by year in terms of when they will be delivered. In other words, when the construction will be finished. In other words, when your clients can actually move in. Next year, in 2026, there's about 1,300 of them. That's not very many. The following year, 2027, 1,200. Not very many. Remembering that we need closer to 20,000 every 10 years. That's an average of 2,000 per year. We're running way short. In 2028, 1,600, and so on. In 2029, 1,700. Moving into the next decade, another 1,600. When you factor in that over half of these are already sold, you've only got 3,600 of the 7,600 that are still available for sale. We're short of inventory when you consider the amount of demand that is continuing to come to South Florida. So when you are imagining that it's the pre-construction inventory that will solve the shortage in MLS, that's misguided. We're not building enough, and because they take a long time to build, they're not going to get delivered as early as some of you may think. Demand, let's go here. For the longest time, you, me, so many realtors have been bragging that South Florida the state of Florida enjoys a population gain of around 1,000 people a day. Again, this is measured by the U.S. Census Bureau. The 1,000 is measured by people moving into the state, and the Census Bureau uses driver's licenses and tax returns for that. And then they subtracted people moving out of the state. Again, those are driver's licenses and tax returns. Then they add births and they subtract deaths. And from 2014 straight through 2023, it was averaging around 1,000 a day. Number two to Texas. Actually, I think in 2023, we outgrew, we had more people moving into the state of Florida than even Texas. Usually Texas is number one, Florida's number two. Last year, we hit a new record of 1,280, 1,280 people per day moving to the state of Florida. I have heard some of you use this data and say that's who's moving to Miami every day. No. That's the state of Florida, Miami certainly included. But so is Jacksonville, so is Orlando, so is Tampa, so is Naples, so is Palm Beach, so is Fort Lauderdale, the entire state of Florida. Only to be surpassed by this year, the U.S. Census now has Florida tracking towards 1,350 people per day. The only state in the United States that passes Florida would be Texas. This year, they're on track to grow by 1,450 people per day. Impressive? Well, you know something? You got to keep in mind, the landmass in Texas is 4 times bigger than the state of Florida. Yeah, you heard me. You could fit 4 Floridas inside the state of Texas. Now take into consideration, at least here in South Florida, we are governed to the east by the Atlantic Ocean and to the west by the Everglades, what many refer to as the sponge of Florida. That beautiful ecosystem that keeps the ecology of Florida in such beautiful balance. Yeah, there's not a lot of room. That's why we're going up. That's why so many of the condominiums are not just high-rises anymore, they're super tall. It's the only way we can continue to accommodate the growth. But you have demand. This does not include, by the way, South Americans, for example, who are buying either for investment or for a second home. This number does not include Americans or Canadians who are buying property here as second homes. Let's not forget, we have some of the most beautiful weather in all of the United States, consistently beautiful. Now, these are people that are calling South Florida, or excuse me, Florida, their permanent home. Of the 1,350, about a third of those come to what we call South Florida, which is Dade County, Broward County, Palm Beach County combined. You may not have known it by the numbers, but you certainly know it by the traffic. The highways and byways are getting crowded. And heck, when you look at all of the construction cranes that are adoring the skyline of South Florida, about half of those is road construction, not just the signature bridge that's getting developed in downtown Miami, but Interstate 95 and many of the roads and highways in South Florida are expanding. The Florida Department of Transportation understands these numbers. They also understand where these numbers are going. California is the most populated state in the country with 40 million people. Texas, a little over 30 million. Florida, 23 million and growing. Yeah, and growing. It was 2012 when Florida passed New York in total population. New York is still hovering around 20 million. That was the year that we passed 20 million. And now you're at 23 and continuing to grow. The forecast for population growth remains incredibly strong. What we need is more housing, single-family homes and condos. It's as if you can't build them fast enough. I often ask people what it's like for particularly realtors here in South Florida. When you travel outside of Florida and you meet a perfect stranger, and that stranger asks quite politely, where do you live? And when you respond Miami, even if it's Fort Lauderdale, even if it's Palm Beach, when you say Miami, you see that sweet envy on the face of that perfect stranger. It kind of makes me wonder what happens next year. You know, in February, or actually late February, early March, we're getting the World Championship Golf Tournament back in Doral. Best golfers in the world will be competing in Doral. Followed by the Miami Tennis Open at the Hard Rock Stadium. It's been there now for years, and it's a magnificent venue. It's a magnificent tournament. Followed by F1. Of course, we always have Art Basel at the end of the year. Yeah, the TV coverage in South Florida is, particularly Miami, it's pretty good. But wait till next year. Because every 4 years, the most popular sport in the world, soccer, that's what we Americans call it. The rest of the world calls it football. Yeah, they're coming to Miami to celebrate their World Cup. Followed by the G20 summit. The top 20 industrialized countries in the world are coming to Miami for the very first time. Imagine the worldwide TV coverage that Miami will receive next year, covering first the most popular sport in the world, and secondly, the heads of state of the top 20 countries in the world coming to Miami at President Trump's Doral to talk about the present and the future of the world. Makes me wonder, when you and I are traveling outside of Miami next year and you meet that perfect stranger. We happen to be fortunate that we're selling real estate, and most of us living here in South Florida, the most popular real estate market in the United States for sure, and maybe the most talked about real estate market in the world. We have demand like we've never had before. We're building spectacular buildings. They all deserve architectural awards. Miami has indeed moved to a whole nother level of a whole nother level. At the end of the year, by the end of Q4, I'm looking forward to giving you the year in review. And I suspect that as the stars line up, we might be looking at one of the strongest real estate years that we have ever seen in 2026, which is right around the corner. Until then, I wish you all nothing but success, lots of luck. I'll see you in January when we produce our year end. Until then, bye-bye.